Welcome to Episode 10. The railroad world lost a long-time proponent. Joe Boardman has passed away.
We're going to take a gorgeous look at Strasburg in the snow.
We've got jet-powered trains.
But what kind of motive power is this?
This is Railroad Showcase. There has never been a time when innovators have not tried to make improvements to the railroads. As the age of aeronautics became a fully realized industry, uses of its technology began to appear in other non-flight applications, even on trains. The first of the trains we'll look at is the AeroWagon from a Russian inventor named Valerian Abakovsky. Developed in 1917 through 1921, for its time, it produced promising speeds of up to 87 miles per hour that attracted potential investors for future development. However, after crashing at high speed, killing 7 people, including foreign delegates and Abakovsky himself, the AeroWagon died with its creator. Right as the AeroWagon faded away, the Benny railplane was just starting out as a concept in the mind of George Benny. Starting work on it that same year, but not building a prototype car and track until 1929. This train was going to ride above existing railways, suspended on a monorail with stabilizing guide rails below, allowing for slower freight to continue on the existing tracks. Dual sets of motors and propellers, one at each end, allowed one car to travel in either direction, theoretically at speeds of up to 120 miles per hour. Unfortunately, despite interest from around the world, the railplane never received the funding needed to actually build the required infrastructure. At that same time in Germany, Franz Kruckenberg was also working on yet another propeller-pushed car. The Schienenzeppelin, so called after its resemblance to the Zeppelin, was Germany's attempt at a quicker method of rail travel. Having a sleek design, being relatively comfortable, and reaching a top speed of 140 miles per hour, the Schienenzeppelin came relatively close to commercial implementation. However, due to its inability to reverse or inability to maintain speed on even moderate grades and some safety concerns such as a large, unguarded propeller spinning near passenger platforms, the German National Railway chose to develop their own high-speed train, the Flying Hamburger. The first plane to fly solely via a jet engine took off in 1939, but it was a considerable time later that turbojet engines were used to move rail vehicles. The first was in the United States, made by the New York Central Railroad in 1966. The M497 Black Beetle was a streamlined Bud rail diesel car with 2 GE J47-19 jet engines. Looking at this piece from a price-to-performance ratio, it had a really high potential to be used. But even with the relatively low build cost and exceptional speeds, setting the American speed record of 183 miles an hour, the railroad didn't really consider it a commercially viable option. Sadly, this once speedy piece of equipment was stripped of its power, and they gave it to something else. You know what they put the engines on? A snowblower. How humiliating. The next notable prototype we find doesn't necessarily fit into the purely air-propulsed category that we're looking at here, but it does warrant an honorable mention. In the early 70s, the FRA was looking into linear induction motors. While technically this train's main power system was not air-related, they did strap some jet engines to the top of it to get it up to speed due to the short testing track available to them at the time. Once up to speed, they were then throttled back only to counteract the drag that they created. In 1970, the Russians were actually the only ones to achieve their goal involving a jet-powered train, just not in the way you might expect. The USSR wanted to create a high-speed rail system using electric trains that could reach 120 miles an hour, but they hadn't solved the hunting oscillation problem found at those high speeds. The research team, taking inspiration from the relative success of the American Black Beetle, took one of their own cars and added jet engines in a similar fashion. They then conducted tests and proved their calculations, and the added data found was then used in their designs for the electric trains. Sadly, once the rail car fulfilled its research function, it was parked and left to rust ever since. The final iteration of air propulsion trains was brought to testing in early 70s France. Jean Bertin spent over a decade dedicated to the creation of the AeroTrain. This particular concept was unique in that it did not use standard rails. Using a cement guideway, the AeroTrain used turbines to force the air under it, making it effectively a guided hovercraft. After several working prototypes, Bertin got the closest to commercial implementation out of all the other air-powered trains, with interest from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, the Mayor of L.A., and representatives from 18 other countries, all topped off with a signed contract with the French government to build a line on the outskirts of Paris. But his dream would not see fruition. France's National Railroad, SNCF, took strong issue with much of his system, such as the tremendous noise the jet engines made, and the new elevated guideways that would be required. These and more led the SNCF to keep pushing for the continued improvement of the current rail lines. The final straw occurred in 1975, when the new Prime Minister stepped into office and officially annulled the contract. After this, all other interest in the system evaporated. Since then, there have been no notable attempts at air propulsion trains. While there are a litany of reasons why these air propulsion trains never had liftoff, there is one that stands out. These engine types don't mix with the current, mostly uniform rail infrastructure that nearly every railroad on the planet has adopted. They work best in maintained high speeds. The current rail systems weren't built to the specifications of a car that travels 180 miles per hour, but can really only do so in a mostly straight line. All this research was not just a blind alley, though. It resulted in advances of understanding and engineering that were required for high-speed rail development in general. They found and addressed issues that would need to be overcome before further progress can be made. Maybe in the future, air propulsion will find its way back into the railroads, but not yet.
Joe Boardman passed away last week on March 7th. He spent more than 40 years in the railroad industry. He served as the commissioner of the New York State Department of Transportation. In 2005, he was appointed head of the FRA by President Bush. Then 3.5 years later, was appointed president and CEO of Amtrak, where he served for nearly 8 years. Not everyone agreed with all of his policies, but many regarded him as a proponent of both freight and passenger rail service. He respected the history of railroads. He is seen here greeting Greg Casford of the 3751 crew in 2009. And he was welcoming to enthusiasts. We see him here with Andrew Fletcher and Ken Marty, respectively. There has been an uncommon level of respect and sadness shown at the passing of a government official. The Trains magazine piece was favorable while acknowledging that he had critics. The Railway Age article held him in high regard. Now, we have 60 Minutes weighing in on the subject of PTC, or positive train control.
They illustrate a failure in the railroad industry to implement a life-saving technology that could have prevented them.
Their segment is guaranteed to either make you cheer or to make your blood boil, depending upon where you stand on the topic of PTC.
Its crew and more than 100 passengers careening off the mainline track and barreling into a CSX freight train parked on a siding.
They focused on a February 2018 Amtrak collision in South Carolina, speaking with the engineer of a CSX crew involved.
Unbelievable.
Mark James was right there. He was the engineer of the CSX freight train that night.
They're bringing people off with broken arms, legs, people mangled, really. And this is something I'll never get over.
And that the crash was the result of human error and violations of long-standing operating procedures. CSX fired both the conductor and engineer Mark James. Are you fighting this?
Yes.
Are you challenging
Yes.
the firing?
Yes. There's nothing I could have done to prevent the accident. I did nothing to cause the accident. And I got fired anyway.
The electrical signal system that sends out alerts when the tracks are not lined up properly was out of service.
Nobody can see what we're doing. It's called dark territory.
It was the CSX conductor's job that night to throw the switches by hand, like this, to realign the tracks and thereby change the direction the train could go.
And then I see, you could tell when that train hit the switch and came in on top of us, you could see where it rocked. My mind was just crazy. I didn't, oh my God, no. Please no, please no.
A surveillance camera near the tracks captured the Amtrak train as it went under a bridge and slammed into the stationary CSX train.
And it was just tearing the locomotives up, and it went up over and turned over that way. And there was nothing left of where I was sitting.
They also interview a trackside business owner.
Tracks are in horrible shape.
Had you ever seen any other accident, any derailment?
Yes, ma'am, it's quite frequent.
It's frequent?
In the last 10 years, there's probably been 7, 8 of them. They forgot to flip the switch and derailed them in here.
The same thing?
Yes, ma'am, forgetting to flip the switch.
And you're just sitting here watching this unfold before your very eyes.
It's a common occurrence.
No evidence was provided to verify the number of accidents he cited.
It amounts to an automatic braking system.
Except extra 835, engineer to conductor, over.
Pat Desir, an engineer for the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, demonstrated how the system works. This is the speed limit, and this is what you're going at the moment.
Exactly. All right, I'm gonna go above it, and I'm gonna show you how PTC works. Fast we're going, and now.
Whoa!
And we received the penalty brake application. Put the train to a complete stop.
Whoa.
We'd like to know what you think about this 60-minute segment. We'll have a poll in the Railroad Showcase RPO group on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, the poll should be on your screen. Was this 60 Minutes piece well done, or was it a hatchet job?
In your opinion, is train travel safe?
No.
Would you put your daughter on an Amtrak train?
No. I wouldn't get on one myself.
Amtrak, which declined our interview request, sent us a statement saying it has made substantial strides on implementing PTC.
The Transportation Safety Board of Canada found the derailment of 27 coal cars was due to a broken axle. The break was caused by fatigue cracking in the journal fillet radius, which the TSB said would not be a detectable flaw during routine inspections. On February 27th, a truck drove around the lowered barriers at a crossing along the Long Island Railroad line in Nassau County. All 3 men in the truck were killed, and 7 people on board the train sustained injuries. BNSF rolled out its 2019 plan for maintenance across 3 states, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. With $445 million going into replacing 400,000 ties and 130 miles of brand new rail, as well as other maintenance, the company has lots of work ahead of them.
So now it's time for an episode of TROLLEYGEDDON. Zaporizhia is a city in Ukraine with a population of 750,000 people. They have an extensive public transit system. But on this day a few years ago, they ended up with one less streetcar.
The Columbia Gorge Model Railroad Club in Portland, Oregon has been around since 1947. They are well established and own their own facility. Recently, Oregon Public Broadcasting produced a really complimentary segment on their operation.
The Model Railroad Club is the biggest model railroad in the Northwest and one of the oldest clubs in the country. Since 1947, its members have built a meticulous replica of the tracks that trace the gorge. From Stonehenge to Crown Point to Union Station.
There's no way in the world I could build something like this at my house. Couldn't afford it. So you join up with everybody else and we come down here and just have a blast.
Go to it. Have fun.
When the full majesty of the railroad gets chugging in its North Portland warehouse, you get a sense of just how far model trains have come from a circular track in the basement with a stop-and-go button.
This is just the entire main line in white, and then the red spots are tracks that are occupied by a train. It's pretty accurate for when you can't see a train.
It takes around 30 people to run the entire setup, from individual conductors to dispatchers buried deep inside the model.
What train do you have? You have the crossover horse thief. Let me know when you're clear.
The nice thing about this club is that there's a whole variety of people. We have some people that all they want to do is run trains. And then there's the opposite in my case, as to where I just enjoy doing scenery.
The club chose to set the model in the 1950s because that was a golden era when steam and diesel locomotives overlapped.
A YouTube channel by Colin E also has some cab ride footage that shows the quality of the layout really well. Anyone in the area interested in joining can send the group an email. November is the month that they are open to the public, and they receive youth groups in December. It's still winter. We might not like it, but we can still appreciate the beauty of it. Here are some of our favorite winter shots of Strasburg. The first one has some run-bys of the number 90. These clear, bright images were shot a couple of years ago. Next we go back a few more years and see 475 pushing their Russell plow. And finally, just last week, the folks from the 717 drone channel on YouTube captured these stunning shots.
And our last video this week is from Heritage Railway Magazine. We're sharing it because, well, how could you not share it? This is so much fun. All right, that's it for episode 10. We are getting more Gold and Silver Spike members every week, and we are honored that you folks find value in this program.
Please, let your friends know about us. Encourage them to watch the free clips on YouTube or Facebook, or encourage them to sign up as members themselves.
Keep your hand on the throttle and your eye on the rail.